Hey everyone, welcome to today's discussion. We're diving into a topic a lot of people were talking about after the pandemic: the rise in divorce rates following the first coronavirus lockdown. It's no secret that the pandemic put relationships to the test. To help unpack this, we've got Emily and Dan with us today. They've both got some strong opinions and have read up on thinkers like Esther Perel and John Gottman. So, let's get into it. Emily, starting with you. Why do you think lockdown had such a huge impact on relationships?
Honestly, I think it's because people were suddenly stripped of all their usual distractions. When life is normal, you've got work, social events, hobbies. Basically, you're not with your partner all the time. But when everything shut down, couples were forced to confront each other in ways they hadn't before. All the little issues that might have been ignored or brushed under the rug were suddenly impossible to avoid. Esther Perel talks about this need for space in mating and captivity, but really, it's common sense. People need time apart to reflect and recharge, and during lockdown, that just wasn't possible.
That's true, but I don't think it's just about needing space. The pandemic also forced people to confront how they were really functioning as a couple. I've been thinking about this a lot. Before the lockdown, couples had a rhythm: work, kids, chores, whatever. And when that rhythm was disrupted, they had to adapt. For some it worked, and for others, it didn't. I think people realized they weren't as compatible as they thought. John Gottman in his work focuses a lot on emotional connection, and I think that's key. If the foundation wasn't strong, the cracks became visible.
I get that, but it's not just about emotional compatibility. I saw people who were emotionally connected but still felt suffocated by being with their partner all day, every day. Perel's point about the need for mystery and individuality really hits home for me here. Desire fades when there's no room for it to grow. It's like trying to keep a fire burning in a vacuum. It just fizzles out.
So, it's a combination of needing space and emotional connection. But what about the stress factor? Do you think the external pressures of the pandemic, like health fears or financial worries, played into these relationship breakdowns?
Oh, absolutely. The stress was enormous. But stress tests a relationship, right? I mean, Sue Johnson talks about this in Hold Me Tight, how couples can either come together in times of crisis or drift apart depending on how secure their bond is. It wasn't just about spending more time together. It was about how couples handled the stress together. If they could communicate well and support each other, they came out stronger. If they couldn't, well, we saw the result in the rising divorce rates.
Yeah, but let's be real. Most people don't have that kind of communication skill set. I think Perel would agree with me here. We put way too much pressure on our relationships. The pandemic made that worse. Partners were expected to be everything: emotional support, coworkers, caretakers, lovers, all in the middle of a global crisis. It's no wonder so many relationships buckled under the weight of it all.
Or true. But even before the pandemic, wasn't that always the case to some extent? We've been idealizing relationships for years. People expect their partners to meet all their needs, and the lockdown just accelerated that. But that's also why I think Gottman's focus on friendship within a relationship is so important. He argues that if you have a strong friendship with your partner, you're more likely to weather the tough times. So, it's not just about desire or mystery. It's about whether you actually like each other when things get rough.
That's a fair point, but liking each other doesn't necessarily sustain a relationship long-term if the passion is gone. You can be best friends with your partner and still end up feeling more like roommates than lovers. The pandemic forced couples into this roommate dynamic where every day felt like the same day on repeat. That monotony can kill desire, no matter how emotionally connected you are. Perel's all about this in Mating and Captivity. She talks about how desire needs unpredictability and distance to thrive. And in lockdown, that was impossible to achieve.
So, are we saying that too much closeness can actually be damaging to a relationship? Dan, do you think that's true, even if there's a strong emotional foundation?
I think it's a balance. Yes, too much closeness can suffocate desire, but it also depends on how couples navigate that closeness. Like Harville Hendrix in Getting the Love You Want talks about how conflict and closeness can actually lead to growth if couples are willing to work through their issues. I think for some couples, the pandemic forced them to deal with things they'd been avoiding for years. It was uncomfortable, but for those who could handle it, it made their relationship stronger.
Maybe, but I think you're being a bit idealistic there. Not everyone has the tools to navigate that kind of intensity. Sure, conflict can lead to growth, but in the middle of a pandemic, most people were just trying to survive, not grow. It's easy to say, use this time to work on your relationship, but when you're stressed about your health or losing your job, the last thing you want to do is have deep, meaningful conversations with your partner.
So there's this tension between conflict being a potential opportunity for growth and just being overwhelming, given the circumstances. But what about solutions? What could couples have done differently during lockdown to protect their relationships?
I think one thing that could have helped is intentionally creating space, even within the confines of the house. Perel talks a lot about maintaining a sense of individuality, and I think that's key. Couples needed to find ways to have some alone time, whether that was reading in a separate room or going for a walk on their own. Just because you're in lockdown doesn't mean you have to be in each other's faces 24/7.
Yeah, and Gottman would probably say that couples needed to keep up with their rituals of connection. Little things like having coffee together in the morning or taking time to listen to each other at the end of the day. Even if everything else is chaotic, those small moments can reinforce the bond. It doesn't have to be grand gestures, just consistent, everyday acts of connection.
And maybe even injecting some spontaneity into the routine. Perel would say that desire thrives on unpredictability, right? So, doing something different, trying a new hobby together, planning a surprise date night at home, could have helped couples feel less like they were just going through the motions.
So it's about finding ways to balance closeness with space and keeping some sense of fun and connection, even during stressful times. Sounds like there's no easy answer, but a lot of thoughtful ways to approach it. Thanks, Emily and Dan, for a really insightful conversation. It's clear that while the lockdown put relationships under strain, it also offered opportunities for growth if couples were able to navigate it well. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Love Under Pressure. Did the pandemic help or hurt relationships? I hope today's discussion gave you some food for thought on how relationships can grow, struggle, or even thrive in challenging times. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And be sure to join us next week, where we'll be diving into another fascinating topic. Can money buy happiness? Exploring the impact of wealth on relationships and well-being. You won't want to miss it. See you next time.